Epilepsy warning for flashing lights and colors. Imagine if there was a website like Rotten Tomatoes, but instead of movies, the reviews of roller coasters were aggregated. Well, allow me to introduce you to Captain Coaster. Run by a group of French coaster enthusiasts, this website has a dedicated base of users. Many of these users are hardcore enthusiasts around the world who have ridden hundreds of roller coasters. Today, we're going to be bringing up the World Roller Coaster Rankings page, which is updated monthly. Here, every single documented coaster is ranked based on user score and a set of site rules to ensure accuracy. So out of the hundreds of still operating coasters ranked on the website, which ones are the worst rated of the bunch? Let's find out today. Number 20, X-Racer on the German Fair Circuit. Owned by the Condor family, this coaster is a classic Wild Mouse model from German manufacturer Mara Rides. Long before the days of their insane spike coaster concepts, this company actually got their start making Wild Mouse coasters. The Wild Mouse, of course, is a vintage coaster concept that predominantly features thrilling dips and tight hairpin turns in a compact layout. As for X-Racer, this coaster has an extremely low average score of 2.5% out of 100 from almost 800 riders. Based on a few POV videos I've watched, the biggest problem with the ride seems to be the block zones. In this case, the brakes seem to hit way too hard, bringing the car to a full stop in some cases. Definitely the worst way to do a block zone, and to be honest, it doesn't exactly sound like riders are having fun in these clips. Overall, if you're looking for a fun Wild Mouse coaster, stick to, well, anything else that isn't Coast Rider, really. Number 19, Crazy Mouse at Japan's Hirakata Park. This is a different type of Wild Mouse coaster built by French manufacturer Reverchon. You may remember them as the makers of Primeval Whirl at Disney's Animal Kingdom. Around the late 90s, the company introduced a new take on the Wild Mouse concept. This took the typical Wild Mouse and added a spinning feature to its vehicles. However, although the Crazy Mouse at Hirakata Park was a spinning coaster model, the ride itself does not have any of the components to make the cars spin. What's interesting is that it's unknown if the feature was removed after the ride opened or if the park chose not to include the spinning feature. On Captain Coaster, this ride has an average 2.4% rating from over 1,300 riders. Now, I'm not exactly sure what put this ride this low on the list, but there are a few reviews out there. HeartlineCoaster.com said it was, quote, nothing special at all. And a coaster blogger named Malcolm said, just when you get ready to have it rotate, it doesn't bother. Perhaps this ride wouldn't have received such middling reviews if it had its intended spinning feature, but who knows. Number 18, Boomerang at Quebec's La Ronde. There are dozens of Boomerang coasters by Dutch manufacturer Vekoma out there. Hell, there are two less than an hour away from where I'm recording this. But would you believe that this coaster is the worst rated of the bunch? You may be wondering what exactly makes this stand out from the others. Well, first of all, this was one of the first Boomerangs ever built, if not the first. Fun fact, this coaster was originally intended for a theme park in the Canary Islands. But that park ended up being cancelled before it even opened, so the ride ended up at La Ronde for the 1984 season, and it's been there ever since. As a result, this coaster is over 40 years old, and judging from the reviews online, it's showing its age. Captain Coaster currently has the ride listed with a 2.2% average rating from over 1,400 riders. One of these riders named Vincent N. gave the ride 1 star, saying, quote, I first rode Boomerang when I was 7, and it was the worst experience of my life. There is constant headbanging, and the over-the-shoulder restraints are as uncomfortable as they can be. The only reason I'm not giving this ride half a star is the intense vertical G-forces. Indeed, Vekoma Boomerangs are pretty forceful attractions for what they're worth, but chances are you can find one better than this. Number 17, Roller Coaster on the French Fair Circuit, though it's also known as Tattoo and Infinity Coaster, depending on what fair it's at. Built by Italian manufacturer SDC, this is another older coaster type known as a Galaxy. The ride experience is made up of a relatively small layout with steep drops and banked helixes. This layout was simple to mass produce at the time, and the model was easy for fairs to repeatedly put together and take apart. As a result, a large number of these coasters have been built over the past half a century. But perhaps the worst one out there is this ride named simply Roller Coaster. From what I've researched, the biggest problem with this coaster is the unnecessary over-the-shoulder restraints. Riders just can't fathom why a relatively mild attraction with no inversions needs to have these restraints. Because in the end, all they provide is completely unavoidable headbanging, which didn't need to be there in the first place. These restraints help give this ride its average rating of 2.1% out of over 1,000 reviews. Indeed, sometimes older rides can be considered vintage and still hold up today, but others like Roller Coaster are simply outdated. Number 16. Mercury's mini coaster at England's Twin Lakes Park. This coaster really confuses me. I'm not one to judge coasters before riding them, but I do admit that a simple wacky worm being ranked among the 20 worst coasters does seem a bit harsh. I haven't been able to find a lot of rider testimonies, and from what I can tell, the coaster doesn't look like it rides any different from the other wacky worms out there. That said, it still boasts a 2.1 average rating from over 400 riders. The same percentage as the previous entry, but with a higher share of lower star reviews. That said, perhaps there's something about this coaster that you can really only experience by riding it. According to RCDB, adults are not allowed inside of this park unless accompanied by at least one child under 15 years old. So if you're looking to get the credits as an adult enthusiast, you're pretty much f***ed. This is probably why there aren't many trip reports or more in-depth reviews of this coaster. But if you've gotten a chance to ride it, feel free to let me know what makes it so bad, because I really am curious. Number 15. Kuku Coaster at Taiwan's Janfosun Fancy World. At first, this coaster's inclusion on the list also confused me. On the surface, it actually seems like a pretty fun ride. This is a powered coaster by Italian manufacturer Zamperla with a custom layout. In all honesty, it looks like a cute and entertaining family coaster. But with the 2% average rating out of almost 1,000 user scores, there's definitely something wrong with it. Not much insight was given on the ride's page, but I was able to find a pretty compelling testimony. On the website rollercoastertraveler.com, there's an in-depth trip report listed for this park. The website has a quick blurb on Kuku Coaster, saying, quote, "Although it's not a crazy thrill, I recommend bracing yourself during the ride. One of Kuku Coaster's curves was actually so brutal that it may cause minor bruises. So don't judge the ride by its cute look, it may hurt to get this credit." Who'd have thought that a coaster so innocent and cute looking could actually cause bruises? Number 14. Cobra at Germany's Freizeitland Geiselwind. A few years ago, we talked about the infamous Wildwind model by Italian manufacturer Interpark. This insanely compact coaster consists of an extremely tight layout, with its star element being a jarring sidewinder. This sidewinder was so forceful that Playland in Rye, New York was actually banned from opening a coaster like this after construction was completed. To this day, none of these coasters have opened in the United States, but there are a few of them in countries like Germany, Tunisia, and Venezuela. One of the earliest permanent installations was at a German park named Freizeitland Geiselwind. Originally opening in the German fair circuit, this coaster ran at the park for 4 months in 2015, before returning in 2018. It still operates there today, but many reviewers wish that it didn't. These reviewers give the ride an average score of 2% out of over 1,300 reviews. The most common criticism is the way the sidewinder bangs your head into the over-the-shoulder restraints. Even worse, the coaster gives a free second lap to passengers. Ordinarily, this would be a fun little bonus, but here it's practically a middle finger to the riders. As for testimonies, there are a few detailed reviews on Google. Bodo Bach says, "The track is a disgrace for the head and neck." Renee says, "The track not only jerks incredibly hard, but also delivers several strong blows. The fun factor is practically non-existent." And Mike D says, "I'm surprised that this railway still has an operating license. Certainly some of the harshest coaster reviews out there." Number 13. Mind Eraser at Colorado's Elitch Gardens. You didn't think we'd get through this list without a Vekoma SLC, did you? Standing for a suspended looping coaster, this mass-produced coaster model was a huge success in the 1990s. It allowed smaller parks to invest in a major multi-inversion thrill ride at a fraction of the cost of more high-end inverted coasters. Unfortunately, these coasters have since become infamous for their relentlessly bumpy rides and awful over-the-shoulder restraints. Granted, Vekoma has made some great efforts to improve these rides with newer trains and vest restraints, but many of these attractions remain the same as they did when they first opened. Out of all the SLCs ever built, the most common name was Mind Eraser, so it's quite easy to get them mixed up. Apparently though, out of all of the SLCs with this name, this one is the worst of them all, scoring a 1.9% out of over 1,100 ratings. Comments include a much rougher than average SLC, extremely rough and uncomfortable, and ouch my head. These make it clear what the ride's issue is. Needless to say, if you're wearing earrings or sunglasses, be prepared for a world of hurt. But the SLC isn't the only infamous coaster model to make this list. Number 12, Volare at Austria's Wiener Prater. This ride shares the name of its model. Built by Italian manufacturer Zamperla, the Volare is a type of flying coaster that sits guests in a face-down position on their stomachs. Riders are locked into cage-like vehicles as if they were sausages in some kind of kitchen gadget. They are then sent through a tight layout of bank turns and 2 heartline rolls. The problem is that the cages are extremely uncomfortable and cramped, with awkward padding on the side of riders' heads and an overall bumpy ride experience. The point of this model was to simulate flying, but the sheer awkwardness of the rider position completely takes away from that. On Captain Coaster, this ride scores a mere average rating of 1.8% out of over 1,700 scores. On its page, you can find comments like, "This just sucked in every way possible, the most uncomfortable ride I've ever ridden," and "Horrible, don't do this shit." Definitely par for the course for this coaster model.
That is one of the worst things I've ever done in my life.
You know, I get it.
Number 11, Flight Deck at Canada's Wonderland. This one is another SLC. Originally, the coaster first opened as Top Gun and was indeed themed to the Tom Cruise movie of the same name. Along with its opening was an admittedly awesome advertisement, narrated by celebrated voice actor Jim Cummings. Take a look.
What's it like to ride the sky? You saw it in Top Gun, the movie. Now you can do it at Paramount Canada's Wonderland on a wild new jet coaster that shatters the thrill barrier. Ride upside down on the outside track on Top Gun, now flying at Paramount Canada's Wonderland, where the magic of the movies meets the thrills of a lifetime.
Get season pass tickets to the adrenaline rush of the summer at the park or Ticketmaster. Get them. Park open Sunday, May 7th.
Geez, this sounds like the most amazing ride ever. Well, the folks at Captain Coaster say otherwise, giving Flight Deck a 1.6 average score out of over 1,600 ratings. You can find a number of scathing reviews and phrases such as trash ride, brutally uncomfortable, never again, and do not go on this ride in all caps. In all honesty though, I rode this coaster back in 2022 and I have to say that Mind Eraser at Darien Lake was a lot worse. I actually had some fun on Flight Deck, though perhaps I rode it on a good day. Either way, the general consensus seems to be that Canada's Wonderland deserves a better inverted coaster. Number 10, Kong at California's Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. Another SLC? Yep, and this time there's a bit of interesting history to it. This coaster first opened at the now defunct Opryland under the name Hangman. However, it only operated for 2 years before the park closed down in 1997. Afterwards, the ride was sent to Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, formerly known as Marine World Africa USA. As you may remember from my video on that park, this coaster was part of a strategy to revitalize the struggling animal theme park with thrill rides. The coaster opened alongside a Vekoma Boomerang model named, well, Boomerang, in 1998, and the park was rebranded to the New Marine World Theme Park. The strategy was a rousing success, rejuvenating the park's attendance and leading to the purchase of more thrill rides. The park was later rebranded as Six Flags Marine World before being known as Six Flags Discovery Kingdom today. And although this SLC may have saved the park from closing, Captain Coaster has this ride listed with a 1.5% average rating out of over 1,600 scores. You can find plenty of negative reviews, but one all-caps review from Euro SSBU cranks things up to 11, saying, quote, "Nope, no, I refuse to ride this again. How in the world do you make a ride that is so rough that you can get pain on the final brake run? I will throw a party the day this piece of shit gets scrapped." I think that quote says enough, but we still have 9 more coasters to go. Number 9, Condor, the Netherlands Wallaby Holland. Geez, another SLC? Well, don't worry, because this is actually the last one to make this list. and this one in particular is perhaps the most historically significant of the bunch. This right here was the first ever Vekoma SLC, opening all the way back in 1994. Though it features the same inversions as the typical SLC layout, the prototype's length is actually slightly shorter at 622 meters, as opposed to the usual 689 meters. It also featured 8 cars per train as opposed to the usual 10. Both this and Kentucky Kingdom's T3 were the only 2 SLCs like this ever built, and Condor is the only one still operating. In recent years, the coaster did receive new trains from Vekoma to improve the ride experience, but most say these did little to improve the relentlessly bumpy ride, giving it an average rating of 1.5% from over 1,800 Captain Coaster users. Even after the new trains were added, you'll see comments like, "My whole body hurts. Not a second of enjoyment on this ride," and gives you the impression it is about to break at some points. It just goes to show that even without headbanging, a ride can still be too rough to enjoy. Number 8. Mini Racer on the Cypress Fair Circuit. This may be the first time I've ever brought up a ride from Cyprus in one of my videos, so to all my viewers from the country, I'm sorry it had to be this one. This coaster, while largely obscure, still has enough ratings to be listed on Captain Coaster, with an average score of 1.2% out of over 400 riders. This model, known as a Crazy Mouse, is built by Interpark, who also made the aforementioned Wildwind. As for this coaster, it isn't a permanent installation and is instead a traveling coaster, but no matter where it ends up, it often leaves riders unsatisfied. There aren't any in-depth comments on Captain Coaster, but you can find a video by YouTube user Coaster Sean called, "Is this the roughest ride ever?" which I will link in the description. In it, several flaws with the ride become clear. First of all, when the chain lift connects to the vehicle, it brutally jerks riders. Then, after a couple of hairpin turns, you enter an awkwardly banked section that suddenly sends you into a curved drop. By all indications, you get slammed into the side of the vehicle and experience immense pain. In the video, you can hear Sean practically screaming in pain at this point. It's really one of those coasters you have to ride or watch someone ride to understand. Number 7. Spinning Porcelain at China's Nanchang Wanda Park. This is the first and only coaster from China to make this list, and it's a very unusual one. Located at Nanchang Wanda Park, this ride sits in a pottery-themed section of the park. The ride vehicles are beautifully themed, resembling Chinese blue and white ceramics. It's definitely one of the most creative paint schemes I've seen on a spinning coaster train. Sadly, the ride itself is said to be absolutely terrible. It has an average score of 1.1% out of over 700 riders. A couple of people have tagged this ride under "tear it down," but there aren't any descriptive reviews beyond that. However, HeartlineCoaster.com said this ride was, quote, "unpleasant at best," adding, "loathe the interior of the cars with their unnecessary seatbelts." If I had to guess, I'd say that the turns are jerky and that the seatbelts only make the discomfort worse. If you've gotten a chance to ride this, I'd love to know what makes it so bad. Number 6. Verrücktwärts at Germany's Rastiland. In recent years, the Vekoma family Boomerang has taken the coaster world by storm, with several opening at various parks. Not to be outdone, Italian manufacturer SBF Visa has their own family shuttle coaster model named the Shift Gear Coaster. The layout consists of a reverse booster lift hill, followed by a brief course with a few banked turns and a dead-end track spike that takes riders backwards. In 2023, Rastiland was the first park to open one of these coasters, and as of right now, this ride named Verrücktwärts is the only shift gear coaster ever built. Unfortunately, the current review suggests that it may end up being the only one. This coaster has a stunning 1% average rating according to over 400 riders. The only written review comes from a user named Shermaine S, saying, quote, "That thing is rough. Why did they go with SBF instead of Vekoma?" Also, German coaster channel Be Tough for the Rough actually released a full video review of this ride. He criticized a few things about it: the rough transitions into the turns causing lateral side blows, the frequent pauses interrupting the ride's pacing, and the reverse section making it impossible for riders to brace for the harsh turns. Still though, his criticism was constructive and he gave some ideas on how to improve the ride. I'll link his review in the description as well. The video is in German, but if you're an English speaker, you can turn on the captions for an accurate translation. Number 5. Star Loop at Italy's Europa Park Milano Idroscalo. This is the second Interpark Wildwind to make this list. from 2016 to 2022, this coaster operated as Loop It at Alu Fun Park in Greece. It was actually the only permanently installed coaster in the country to feature an inversion. Well, it didn't end up being permanent, because in 2023, it was moved to Europa Park Milano Idroscalo in Italy. Here it was renamed to Starloop. The coaster just recently opened, and the park it's at is pretty obscure, so it doesn't have many reviews. Luckily, YouTube channel Dylan's Coaster Universe recently documented this coaster with some truly excellent and helpful footage. The complaints of this ride are pretty much the same as Cobra's, but apparently it's even worse. Dylan said the ride's transitions, especially into the Sidewinder, are, quote, some of the worst transitions I've experienced. He also clarified that the coaster is indeed way worse than Cobra, earning the right spot on this list and its average Captain Coaster rating of 0.9% out of over 400 reviews. In a way, I'm almost curious to ride this coaster just to see how bad it is. But I'm not really interested in a one-way ticket to Puke City, so let's move on. Number 4. Magic Mountain at France's Luna Park Frejus. This coaster is an ultra-rare Typhoon model by Italian manufacturer Top Fun. It is the only Typhoon still left in operation. With an average score of 0.7% out of over 1,100 rides, it's clear why this model is so rare. The small size layout consists of a number of banked turns along with an incline loop, which is basically a standard vertical loop tilted to the side a bit. The thing about this ride is that each turn feels like a rough slam, and the whole thing is just a chore to sit through. Even the lift hill has unnecessary jolts that come out of nowhere. Geez, if you're not even safe on the lift hill, then what the hell is going on here? YouTube user Diary of a Roller Coaster Girl put it this way: whilst I am normally a very positive person when it comes to even the worst of coasters, there are still some that are completely undefendable. This POS can be found at Luna Park Frejus on the south coast of France. Burn it to the ground. I guess you could call this ride the Flame Hyenard of roller coasters. If you know, you know. On the bright side, this ride does make for a good punchline. For example, you can imagine a little kid saying, "Mom, can we go to Magic Mountain?" and the mom saying, "We have Magic Mountain at home." Number 3. Time Warp at Canada's Wonderland. Originally opening as Tomb Raider the Ride, this was once the most blatant example of slapping an intellectual property on a cheap ride. After Cedar Fair acquired the park, the name was changed to Time Warp in 2008. No matter what its name is though, this ride is rated the worst Volare on Earth, with an average score of just 0.7% out of over 1,600 rides. The funniest review came from David Parrott. He said of the ride, quote, "This thing is evil. I assume its designer was briefly paid to work from their padded cell at the asylum, with the instructions to make a ride that provides the most unpleasant experience possible. I mean, you're placed in a cage facing down and then pummeled with the most curvy and bumpy track imaginable." Also, for those of you who love food references in my videos, Andrew E. made one for me by saying, "As soon as you drop off, the pain begins as your neck and head are bashed about like a schnitzel being tenderized." Now to be fair, this is another one of the few coasters on this list I actually got to ride for myself, and I didn't completely hate it. It wasn't great, sure, and it wouldn't even crack my top 200 to be honest, but I've definitely ridden worse. Again, maybe I just rode it on a good day. Number 2. Euromir at Poland's Luna Park Robland. Not to be confused with the spinning coaster at Europa Park, this ride is nowhere near as beloved, with an average score of just 0.6% out of over 300 rides. This coaster just recently got added to the rankings on Captain Coaster, and so there isn't a whole lot of information about it. Plus, its manufacturer is a complete mystery. They're presumed to be an Eastern European country considering where most of their rides were installed, but nobody knows which country they're from. As a result, there's no way in hell I can pronounce the manufacturer's name. And nobody knows if that even is the name of the manufacturer. RCDB says the only indication is that word being printed on the cars. As for Euromir, there are plenty of bad star ratings on Captain Coaster, but nobody really talks about why this coaster is so bad. Meanwhile, YouTube user Domino Mosina, who provided this footage, said the ride was, quote, "rough but fun." Based on the video, this ride appears to be a launch coaster, using what I assume are drive tires to launch passengers out of the station. But what's weird is that they don't immediately go through the course. Instead, there's sort of a swing launch, with passengers going partway up the first incline before going backwards through an unbanked turn. The train hits the turn at a pretty high speed, so this does not look very comfortable. Only after a second pass through the station's launch is the ride able to complete the layout. This coaster is just flat out bizarre, and I'd love to cover it again in a future video. But for now, I may need to take some ibuprofen just watching this footage. Number 1. Viking roller coaster at Poland's Energylandia. Yes, Energylandia. This is home to such acclaimed rides as Zadra and Hyperion, but it's also home to what Captain Coaster agrees is the worst roller coaster out there. This is a spinning coaster built by SBF Visa. Its layout resembles that of a spinning wild mouse with dips and hairpin turns. So what makes it stand out for being so horrendous? Well, it has over-the-shoulder restraints. Yes, over-the-shoulder restraints on a spinning coaster. So when you spin, you'll experience lateral G-forces which will slam you into the restraints. Therefore, many have declared the restraints as entirely unnecessary. The coaster doesn't even have inversion, so why are they there? At an average score of just 0.5%, there's no shortage of harsh words on Captain Coaster. And on top of that, the reviews on YouTube aren't kind either.
That was horrible. That's definitely the worst coaster here.
Well, that abomination behind me may just be the worst roller coaster I've ever ridden. Ow! Ow! Oh! Oh! Oh!
I think that is the worst roller coaster I've ever been on.
To sum it all up, here's one more review from a user named Rebecca. Aristotle once said, "We cannot learn without pain. I have followed this philosophy my whole life. When I wake up in the morning and stub my toe, instead of screaming, cursing the world, I recite Aristotle's wise words. What can I learn from this? I can learn to be more careful when walking barefoot around the house. I can learn to wake myself up properly before getting out of bed. I can learn to wear slippers. I can learn to avoid the corners of furniture. Pain shouldn't be avoided as you can benefit from the challenge that pain gives you. It makes you question why it made you feel a certain way, and without pain, we would never learn. If as a child we never played with fire and suffered the consequence of a burnt hand, we'd never understand the importance of fire safety. On the plane to Poland, those words, "we cannot learn without pain," resonated louder and louder. Approaching this ride, I smiled. I wasn't scared of pain. I was wrong. This ride gave me my definition of pain. My learning experience from it was simply that I'd never ride it again. And that, in my opinion, is the perfect way to wrap up this video. So are there any coasters that you think should or shouldn't be on this list? Feel free to head to CaptainCoaster.com in the description and rank the rides you've been on. The more reviews, the more accurate. Also, special shout out to Austin Callis 2954, who correctly guessed the 2 coasters in the original thumbnail I posted. Now it's time for the comment shoutout program. This is where I take 5 random comments from my previous video and read them out. These comments come from my video on IAPA 2024. It's Junior says, "Hey, can you talk about that new park in Brazil? It's called Cacao Park. It was announced yesterday. Finally a coaster worthy of Latin America. I definitely am interested." Catherine Zimmerman 6997 says, "Dude, can we talk about that beast of a vacuum cleaner shown at the very beginning? I have a toddler who likes to throw food on the ground and I freaking need that thing for my house." Line X6T says, "I've been on the Zero Gravity at Casino Pier. RIP Moby Dick." Slightly Shroomy says, "I'm excited the Columbus Zoo is 20 minutes from me, haha. The new slides look super fun." And Matt Batoni 1254 says, "I'm just here for the steamed hams reference." If you want to see your words in my next video, leave a comment down below and it may be selected. Please note though that inflammatory or spam comments will not be read. Thank you all so much, and if you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so once again at the link in the description. Thanks for watching everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. And I'm on TikTok. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.